This presentation comes from the Schoolhouse Gate, Public Education, the Supreme Court, and the Battle for the American Mind by Justin Driver. This video presentation is an overview of Chapter 3, Suspensions, Corporal Punishment, and Intolerable Zero Tolerance Policies, produced by Justin Collier and Canicia Holmes. Beginning of the chapter. During the 1970s, there were two major Supreme Court case decisions involving constitutional limitations on how and can public schools discipline their students. Goss versus Lopez of 1975. 9 students sued the Columbus public school system in Ohio after they were suspended for 10 days. The principal failed to take the proper steps of suspension before ordering the students to go home. However, Ohio state law did not require them to take those proper precautions. The students argued that the lack of due process in suspension proceedings. The case was heard by a federal court, and they found that the students' rights were violated. The case was appealed and sent to the Supreme Court. It was decided by the Burger Court on January the 22nd, 1975. The case was argued on October the 16th, 1974. Goss versus Lopez continued. The court's 5-4 ruling declared that the schools had to provide certain levels of due process when students are suspended. The court declared that Ohio did not recognize students' rights to education as property interests protected by the Due Process Clause that could not be taken away without minimum procedures required by the clause. Schools are now required to notify students why they were being suspended and provide them with an informal opportunity to rebut this justification. Importance of the case. The Supreme Court's decision elevated the salience of schools' disciplinary procedures, requiring the lagging districts to adopt a minimum level of process and encouraging other districts to afford stronger protections. All schools are now required to take proper precautions before issuing disciplinary actions. Ingram versus Wright of 1977. On October 6, 1970, an 8th grader, James Ingram, was subjected to particularly harsh corporal punishment. Also, corporal punishment was allowed in this school district. Principal Willie J. Wright paddled several students for accusations of being disruptive during an assembly. Ingram denied those accusations and refused his punishment. When Ingram refused, he was held down to receive 20 swats with the paddle. His mother later took him to the hospital due to this punishment, where he was prescribed cold compresses, laxatives, and painkillers for hematomas. This court case was decided by Burger Court on April 19, 1977, and argued on November the 2nd through the 3rd of 1976. Ingram versus Wright continued. Justice Lewis Powell delivered the 5-4 decision that corporal punishment does not violate the 8th Amendment or prevent corporal punishment in public schools. Justice Powell also held that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment was satisfied by Florida law. Importance of the case. Ingram versus Wright is a landmark case in United States history because not only did it uphold corporal punishment in public schools, but the court decided that corporal punishment did not violate the 8th Amendment's prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. Still to this day, there are still some states that still allow corporal punishment in public schools. Goss versus Lopez, and Ingram versus Wright. The Supreme Court decisions in Lopez and Ingram, decided in less than 3 years apart, pulled in two different directions regarding constitutional limitations on schools' ability to sanction students. Both cases were decided by 5-4 margins, indicating that each individual justice did not careen between the two opinions, even if the institution did. Zero tolerance policies. School policies calling for automatic suspension or expulsion of students who bring forbidden items such as drugs or weapons to school or who engage in undesired behavior.